What's going on, gardeners? It's Saturday, November 26th, and it is a gorgeous fall day here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. On today's video, I'm going to show you 4 tips on how to put your garden beds to sleep for the winter, as well as 1 tip that I never do that some gardeners promote to do, but I personally think is a waste of time and your hard-earned money. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon storefront and spread shop in the video description for a list of the gardening products I use and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated. The first tip is how to properly remove weeds and old plants from your garden bed when you want to put them to rest for the season. Now, weeds should be an obvious. You obviously want to remove every weed possible from your raised garden bed so you don't have any weed seeds germinating throughout the next season. But there is some controversy when it comes to removing your plants because no-till gardening has become all the rage over recent years, so some people are reluctant to pull up and rip out all of the old plant roots because it can disturb your soil. Now, here is my take on the subject. During the last growing season, I put no-till gardening to the test, and I grew corn in a bed that was no-till on one half and corn in a bed that was tilled on the other half, or rather, soil was just simply disturbed. And I'll make sure to link to that video above because it taught me a lot about the efficiencies of no-till gardening. So after performing that experiment, what I learned was if you are going to plant in this garden bed within the next 60 days or so, you are going to want to remove all of the old roots from that bed because they will not decompose fast enough for you to plant a fresh crop in there, and all of the old roots will be intrusive. So if you plan to use this bed within the next 2 months, please remove all of the old roots. That way you can free up the soil and the new plants won't be restricted. Now, if you're going to be putting this garden bed to rest for a long period of time, that is when you'll have to decide whether you want to simply clip the plants off at the base and leave the old roots, or if you want to pull out all of the old roots manually. And my theory on this subject is it depends on what you were growing in here. In this bed right now, we have all of my old determinate tomatoes from the previous season, and things like nightshades and cucurbits, so those will be your tomatoes, your peppers, your potatoes, your eggplants, your zucchini, your other squashes and gourds, your melons, your cucumbers. All of those things are highly susceptible to disease, as well as where I live, nematodes, and root knot nematodes are a problem in my native sandy soil. So for that reason, if I'm growing anything in these old beds, I want to pull up all of those roots because they can harbor pests and diseases. So if your last planting were disease and pest susceptible crops, get them out of there. However, if your last planting was things that aren't really very susceptible to diseases and pests and also have small root systems, you may want to consider leaving them in there. So things like lettuce and spinach and anything that is nitrogen fixing like peas or beans, you probably actually want to leave those roots in there. So just go down to the base of the plant, clip them off flush with the soil line, remove the old plants, and then leave the roots in there because either they're not very pest or disease susceptible, so you can let them compost all winter long since you have the time to do that, or there may actually be nitrogen locked up in those roots if they are nitrogen fixing, so you can leave them in there so they can release all of that nitrogen into the soil so you have extra nutrients in there for the next year. So because these are tomatoes in this bed, what we're going to do is rip up all of the plants and then shake as much of the precious dirt off of the roots as possible. Then I'm going to pull my drip irrigation so I can rake the bed clean and make sure that I remove as many old fruits as possible to minimize the amounts of seed in the soil so they won't germinate and give me crazy amounts of weed pressure from all the new volunteer tomatoes that'll be coming up the next season. Now we have ourselves a nice, beautiful, clean, and de-weeded and de-rooted garden bed. Now, the second tip I'm going to give you is to amend your soil with kitchen scraps. And in this bowl right here, I have some amazing things I've collected from my kitchen over the past week. There are sweet potato skins, celery ends, coffee grounds, eggshells, banana peels. All of these things are excellent to sprinkle on top of your garden soil so they can sit for months and leach their nutrients into the soil and re-nutrify your garden beds. Now, when using kitchen kitchen scraps to amend your garden soil, generally speaking, there are only a few rules. You don't want to use anything that has a lot of seeds in it because those seeds could then germinate and lead to a weed problem later. You don't want to use any citrus peels because they contain acids and oils that retard the composting process, and you don't want to place anything in there that could foster disease. So I don't usually compost things like tomatoes or peppers or eggplants or cucumbers because they tend to be highly susceptible to disease. So we're going to very evenly sprinkle these kitchen scraps all over the garden bed. Now that the kitchen scraps have been placed on top of our garden beds, the third tip is to cover everything in compost. And for this process right here, I am using an organic mushroom-based compost, but if you have a manure-based compost or any other kind of compost, it should be fine as long as you're certain that it does not contain any residual pesticides or herbicides. Since this is organic, I should be pretty confident there should be no residual pesticides or herbicides within this compost. Now, my raised bed here is 4 feet by 10 feet or 40 square feet, and I have 2 bags of mushroom compost, each that are 0.75 cubic feet, and I find this is absolutely perfect for the raised bed. So I'm going to place each bag, and each bag should cover about half the bed. Then I'm going to rake it so it's spread evenly into a layer that's about 1 inch or so thick. And the fourth tip is something that is often overlooked, but it is so easy to do, and you absolutely must do it because the benefits are outstanding. And that is to cover your garden soil with a tarp. Now, you can use mulch, and I've used mulch in the past, but I think that the tarp is overall the better thing to cover your garden beds with, and that is for 4 distinct reasons. First off, the tarp best protects the top layer of your soil from the harsh UV rays of the sun all winter long. And while you think the sun may be weak throughout the winter, the fact is it is going to be beating on your garden soil for months at a time, and over time that can sterilize that top layer of soil. So when you cover it with a tarp, you actually protect the soil from sterilization, and that protects your microbiome. 2, the tarp will lock in heat because as the sun beats on that tarp all day long, not only will it attract more heat to the soil, but it will hold it in, and that will keep your soil unusually warm. Contrast that to a mulch layer, which will actually keep your soil cool. So because we're locking in heat with the tarp, what you're actually doing is you're increasing the biological activity of the soil, you're speeding things up by making that soil warmer, and that will enhance the decomposition process, and it will also help enhance the size of the microbiome because the bacteria and fungi can continue to grow in the warm soil where it would otherwise be a lot cooler. The third benefit of the tarp is you will prevent any possible germination of any weed seeds in that bed, and you saw how many tomato and ground cherries I had littering the ground, so I need all the help that I can get. Because it will block out the sun, it won't be possible for any of those seeds to germinate, and because it will get very hot in there under the tarp, I may actually destroy a good amount of the seeds under there. So this could actually destroy some of the weed seeds. And 4, it will keep any weed seeds that are blowing around in the air from landing on top of your garden soil. And believe it or not, most weed seeds, like your grasses and your other type of weed seeds, are actually airborne. They blow around through the air because they're very light, and then they land on top of your soil and they germinate. That is where most of the weeds in your garden come from. They're airborne. So if you have your soil exposed all throughout the fall, winter, and early spring, those weed seeds from the various grasses and the like are blowing around, landing on top of your soil. So when you tarp it, you prevent any weed seeds that are airborne from landing on your soil. So what I do is I lay my tarp over the garden soil, and then I place bricks down to hold it into place, and that can sit on top of your soil for months or as long as you need it. Most of my larger tarps are already in use around my garden, so if you have to use a smaller tarp and you can't cover every square foot of the garden, you can just throw some wood on there or cover it up with whatever you possibly can. You want to get as good of coverage as possible. And now for the one thing that I never do to my garden beds when I turn them over or I rest them that I see other gardeners do. And that is amend them with any types of fertilizers or other types of commercial soil amendments. And I don't do this for a very specific reason. I think they are very expensive. That's why, plain and simple. If I were to put down a bunch of fertilizer on my raised garden beds right now, what am I fertilizing exactly? What am I spending my hard-earned money on? My opinion is if I put down the fertilizer now, that fertilizer is going to break down and it's going to over time slowly get washed out of the beds as it rains. So you're really fertilizing nothing and it's washing away, or it's basically the nutrients are evaporating over time. They don't just sit in that soil completely perfectly. That soil doesn't hold onto every single little molecule of nutrients. So in my opinion, you're really just wasting your time doing that. Even if you cover your garden bed with a tarp and you prevent washout like I do, you're still not going to be making use of 100% of that fertilizer. And furthermore, it is not necessary to fertilize every single square inch of your garden bed. The fertilizer should be used targeted. So I put down plenty of kitchen scraps and compost, which is going to add plenty of nutrients in that bed all over every square inch of the bed surface. So I don't need to add any more expensive fertilizer. Then in the spring, when it comes time to plant the individual plants, I will amend the planting holes of the transplants, or if I'm planting seeds, I'll top dress around the area with the expensive fertilizers in a targeted application. That way I'm not spending my hard-earned money just throwing gobs of fertilizer into my beds right now to basically fertilize nothing. That's my personal opinion, and that's what I would recommend everybody do to save their money. And that right there are 4 tips to help you put your garden beds to rest for the season. And of course, this is not just for resting your garden beds all season. I also do all of this stuff when I simply turn them over throughout the growing season as well. So if I wanted to plant something in the garden beds 30 days from now, I would use this exact same process. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden in real life, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront in the video description, so check that out to see everything I use in real life. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Look, Dale, that's you. Look, Dale, that's you over there, Dale. Are you watching you on the TV? I'm editing a video with you in it. Look at Dale go. Look at him go. That's you, buddy. That's you.